To navigate this landscape, a synergy of policy cohesion, green investments, and green structural transformation is vital. The influence of digital technologies and their integration with green national investment plans offer unprecedented paths for sustainable growth. Through this dialogue that we are hosting today, we launch here in Addis Ababa and the 19th session of the African Ministerial Conference on the Environment, the Science Policy Business Forum Africa, as a partnership arm for the implementation of AMCEN decisions. Through this dialogue, we will shine a light on the actions required to achieve sustainable economic and social transitions while overcoming the barriers holding us back. This session is an important milestone towards the African Climate Summit hosted by the Government of Kenya. Excellencies, today we have a license to speak openly and boldly. It is only through these brave and candid interactions that we build trust and forge solid partnerships for the future. To open the session, it is my pleasure to invite UNEP Deputy Executive Director and UN Under-Secretary General, Ms. Elizabeth Mrema, to share her thoughts on partnership and how to move forward together.
This is unfair that I have to come in between the lunch which Excellencies are enjoying. But please bear with me since I'm under instructions to say something. Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates, esteemed partners, friends, today we are looking at the matter which is at the heart of our future, the crucial role of green structural transformation and the power of partnerships in realizing the Africa Agenda 2063. Our continent aspires to an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven by its citizens and representing a dynamic force in the global arena. To achieve this vision, we must embrace sustainable environmental practices across all sectors. First and foremost, the urgency of addressing climate change cannot be understated. According to the World Bank, by 2030, climate change could push an additional 100 million people into poverty globally, with a disproportionate impact on African nations. However, by committing to green structural transformation, we are not only mitigating these risks, but are able to unlock the opportunities which are vast in the continent. The African Development Bank has pointed out that Africa has the potential to harness its renewable energy resources amounting to 10 terawatts of solar energy or 350 gigawatts of hydroelectric power and 110 gigawatts of wind power. So beyond energy, our agricultural methods need equally to evolve. The UN Economic and Social Commission for Africa suggests that sustainable agricultural practices can increase yield by up to 128%, playing a significant role in ensuring food security in a continent expected to house about 2.5 billion people by 2050. But where and how is the role of the private sector? And here we are saying, yet governments alone cannot bear the weight of this transformation. The private sector, as the engine of our economies, must be at the forefront. Recent UNEP data suggests that green business opportunities could be worth up to $1.2 trillion annually by 2030, just by African private sector. And it's good to see some of them in front of you. And with regards to partnerships, partnership is our strongest asset. Collaborations between public institutions, private entities, civil society can create the synergies required for large-scale change. Initiatives such as the African Green Stimulus Program highlights the positive impacts of such collaboration. And we hope this will be able also to attract the finance and investments needed. And here lies basically our most significant challenge and yet opportunity: financing the green transformation. United Nations Conference on Trade and Development UNCTAD reports suggest that investment gap in developing countries to meet the Sustainable Development Goals is $2.5 trillion annually. To bridge this gap, we need to make Africa an attractive destination for private finance and direct foreign investment, ensuring transparent regulatory frameworks are in place, robust infrastructure, and promoting sustainable business practices will be key. Public-private partnerships remain a potential tool in our arsenal. The symbiotic blend of public oversight with private sector efficiency can lead to unparalleled outcomes. A shining beacon for such collaboration is the world of e-commerce. Giants like Jumuiya, born in this continent or on this continent, have expanded access to goods and services, fostered economic growth, and showcased Africa's prowess in digital innovation. Safaricom, through its revolutionary M-Pesa platform, has demonstrated how private enterprise, when aligned with public objectives, can catalyze the financial inclusion and stimulate economic growth, even in the remote-most areas of the region. Our infrastructure pursuit, especially in energy and transport, should equally be sustainable, resilient, and futuristic. We are all aware of Africa's vast untapped renewable energy potential. Harnessing this not only assures us of energy security, but also catapults us into greener trajectory. The winds of innovation blow strongly across our land. Kenya's Silicon Savannah is teaming up with the startups in the health, agriculture, and fintech sectors, propelling the nation into technological frontier. Meanwhile, we know in Botswana is laying down robust innovation ecosystems supported by both the government and international partnerships, leading to strides in e-commerce and digital education. These are only some of those which need providing enabling environment where there's no challenge to a greater Africa to overcome. As we look to Africa Climate Summit in Kenya, let us carry us with this momentum and urgency. It is here that we need to lay down that tangible roadmap together. In conclusion, honorable ministers and partners, the path to realizing Africa Agenda 2063 is green. By intertwining our environmental goals with economic ambitions, not only do we safeguard our environment, but also build resilient, prosperous future for all Africans. And I urge all to champion green structural transformation in your nations, fostering partnerships and facilitating private investment that will shape a sustainable Africa. I look forward to these important discussions during these few hours or minutes of our conversation with partners joining us here during the AMCEN. Thank you, and let the conversation begin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Now we are going to start our conversation. This is an open forum. We are going to be as candid, as relaxed, and as open as possible, because this is how partnerships happen. Now, what we are doing today, we always have ministers right here on the stage, and today we are switching it up a bit. So we are putting our friends from finance and the private sector on the hot seat, allowing our ministers and our policymakers to ask the questions and feel free to grill them just a little bit. So please allow me to introduce my panel. Stephen Kokoda is Executive Director of the International Copper Association, managing the entire copper industry around the world. Stephen, please, thank you. Dr. Anthony Nyong. Dr. Anthony Nyong leads climate and green growth in the African Development Bank. Anthony, you're welcome. Emily Waita, she's board chair for environment for Kenya Private Sector Association, a key partner to the Africa Climate Summit. She also represents Coca-Cola Africa. Emily, you are welcome, please come. Joseph Mokaya is head of Safaricom, Ethiopia. Clement Blanc is CEO of Sub-Saharan Africa, DHL. Tesfaye Medane is General Manager of Akobo Minerals. It's a company from Norway that is specialized in gold mining, and this is the Africa branch. And then last but not least, Bernard Amuka is partner in KPMG. Okay, so I would like actually to start the conversation, and do forgive me if I do put you on the spot, but we need your opinions, we need your insights, and we need your feedback on some of the crucial issues. So actually, I want to start with the Minister of Environment, Egypt, Dr. Yasmin Fuad. Dr. Yasmin, in its capacity as COP27 president, the Egyptian government launched last year an initiative to green national investment plans across developing countries, and with focus also on Africa. I want you to tell us more about the initiative and how it could transform the way countries achieve their environmental goals, but also in this context, how do you see the role of the private sector and industry?
Thank you very much, Shireen. I'd like to start by thanking the government of Ethiopia for hosting the AMCEN meeting, as well as the chair of the AMCEN Senegal, as well as the UNEP for preparation, as this is the first time I speak today. Greening our national budget was a very bold decision that we took in the middle of COVID. And it was taken even before we decided to host the COP. And it was taken by the Prime Minister. In the middle of the COVID, we realized that we cannot keep doing business as usual. We cannot do our national plans by our own money within the same process without further integrating sustainability, environment, and climate within that process. So we took a very bold decision that we started by saying up till 2030, 100% of our projects that is funded by our national budget will be green projects. That was back in 2021. So we said we'll start by 15%, 30% until we reach 100%. And that was a joint initiative between the Ministry of Planning and the Ministry of Environment. We set a criteria, and sector cannot access the finance from the Ministry of Planning until this criteria is integrated in the projects. And we went down further into different sectors that are similar. So we took the transport, the energy, the oil and gas, and we've done a guidelines for them. We've got the water and the agriculture, we've done more specific guidelines, and so forth. This was further enlarged by engaging the private sector. So we started by different business associations to spread the thing as when you're doing a certain project, how much of that is integrating the environment? Is there a criteria that you can match? And this was done on a voluntary basis by the business sector. And then we opened up that initiative to be a greening the national budget for Africa and developing countries. So we wanted to make sure there are so many plans, and we will see that even today and tomorrow. We have the plans for biodiversity, we have the plans for the climate. The people coming from the environment are very complicated in the way they use plans, and every kitchen has its own plan. So we felt that it is very important that a criteria would be put, voluntary, that would help those countries to do those plans, because at the end of the day, we have nationally determined contribution in the climate. We have the national biodiversity plans in the biodiversity world. And we have so many things for each of the convention. One thing that would let us really work more efficiently, if there were targets that the country would do voluntary, saying that this is the criteria that we would like to green our national budget. But greening our national budget as a decision that was taken by the cabinet of ministers in Egypt in the middle of the COVID was a very bold decision. And it required three things to be able to flourish. It required a commitment and a study and a follow-up in order to happen. Number two, it requires other ministries that are not related to the environment, like the Minister of Finance gives the fund to the Minister of Planning, and the Minister of Planning negotiates with the sector ministers. The role of the Ministry of Environment at that part was to answer a very important question, and that is the question that I would like to raise today to the private sector, as you've mentioned in the introduction, is what's in for me? We wanted to help the other ministries like oil and gas, like electricity, like transport, agriculture, and even ministries that are of cross-cutting nature, like culture, like youth, like social solidarity, to answer the question of what's in for me, to apply the criteria to green my projects in order to get the fund, because it's not only about the fund. Once we've done that, we were able to do a great breakthrough in the country of having more stakeholders into that. So my question, I've just went quickly through our initiative. My question for the different private sectors, although you're wearing different hats, that question is not dedicated to the ADB. So it is because there will be a question to the ADB in that part. For the private sector, those that are working in telecommunication, minerals, or whatever, what's in for you in order to green your own budget or to work towards integrating environment and carbon and low carbon initiatives within your plans? That is one. And for the ADB, how can you ensure, other than the business as usual of engaging more private sector, that you are helping countries to advance more their enabling environment and the market and the demand and the supply towards more greening and engaging large stakeholder? And here the question is not how to engage the private sector, because that's business as usual for the MDB, but how can you enlarge the pie? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fuad, and thank you for having this bold and very interesting beginning of our conversation. I think we may need the microphone to still stay close. So maybe I'll throw this at Steve Kokoda with your international experience in these areas, and feel free, should you want to ask or to clarify, certain points from Minister Fuad.
Your Excellency, thank you for those inspiring opening remarks. And the biggest message that I took from that is, Egypt's approach to say it can't be business as usual. I think that that's a message that permeates not just for countries, but for industries and for companies. I mean, the trajectory on temperature change and CO2 emissions doesn't go down, it continues to go up. So clearly we're not doing the right things, so business as usual approach no longer be accepted. And I appreciate, the challenges of trying to green the national budget that's quite aggressive, 100% by 2030, right? I mean, that's staggering. I mean, I want to build off of that, if I may, for a few seconds, for all of the governments that are represented here. There's something like 1/5, about 20% of global GDP is from government purchases. I mean, governments themselves and the things that they buy are driving 20% of the world's GDP. And almost exclusively, those decisions are based just on a first cost. What's the lowest cost product that I could buy? So taking the case of Egypt as an example, make those investments green and look at life cycle costs and life cycle impacts rather than the first cost. And then I'll just finish up, Shireen, just the question, what's in it for us? I represent an extractive industry. We're providing one of the building blocks for the clean energy transition and for decarbonization. 2/3 of the solutions that allow us to decarbonize require copper. We announced just a very few months ago our plans to decarbonize the copper industry. So we take that responsibility very seriously, that we're not just providing a building block that we have to take care of our own house. What's in it for us is we have to do this or we'll be excluded from end-use markets. And that's really the direction. You have to embrace sustainability as companies, as industries, or your customers are not going to do business with you. That's what's in it for us. Thank you.
Can I say, I'm a bit surprised, Steve, because I remember a few years ago in New York in one of the meetings, the copper industry said, we need governments to create incentives, we need to create demand for greener products. And it sounds to me, when Minister Fouad and the Egyptian government actually launched, not only for Egypt, but for the world, for the developing world, for Africa, and there was a huge presence from these countries during that launch, during Solutions Day last year, during COP27, I imagined immediately that can open the door for greater investment in better technologies, greener technologies, more sustainable technologies, which require policies, especially policies when it comes to spending, I imagine. So I'm a little surprised that you didn't mention that angle and incentives.
Well, I mean, I wanted to answer her question, directly, right? Yeah, I mean, policies are definitely critical in all of this, and I don't want to sound self-serving because there's many different directions that policies can go. For extractive industries like us, I mean, we heard the speaker this morning say that 1/3 of the world's mineral supplies are here in Africa, okay, which means that Africa is driving the clean energy transition and decarbonization, right? So what policies are going to be put in place that will allow Africa to be able to enjoy correctly that wealth that will come from this vast stock of minerals that are on the continents? That's one part of it. But then it becomes, what are the policies that will allow them to be extracted and done so in an environmental way? Permitting times for mines around the world, they vary, but sometimes they're measured in decades. They're not measured in months and years. And if there's an expectation that we're going to decarbonize as a planet, you're not going to do that without the building blocks. The building blocks are here in Africa, right? So the governments need to, in my opinion, to have policies in place that will allow those resources to be extracted to benefit the world in an environmental way.
Thank you very much. And maybe I'll just tap into the logistics industry and DHL, if you would share your view regarding Minister Yasmin's point.
Yes, thanks. I would like just to mention that we all live on the same planet, right? So I think it's everybody's problem and everybody's concern. So regardless of which industry we are from, we are all concerned and we are all responsible to play a part in making the world greener. From a business point of view, the DHL Group is the largest logistics company in the world. Transport and logistics represent around 7% of the global carbon emission. So as being the leading company in one of the most polluting industry in the world, we feel it's a huge responsibility for us to be also at the forefront of investing in greener energy and in making our industry greener. Just to give you an idea, we have, for DHL Group, we have committed that by 2050 we would be carbon neutral, and we are investing just right now, 7 billion euro until 2030 in green energies, in making our operations more sustainable. And we want to be the pioneer in our industry because we believe by doing so, first, our competitors will have no choice but follow us, so it will create a momentum. Our customers more and more are demanding it anyway, so in the RFQs that we receive from our customers, there is always now a criteria related to our initiative to be more sustainable in terms of the environment. So it's a requirement for the business. And on top of that, also our employees, especially the younger employees, they want to work for a company who is at the forefront of making the world more sustainable. So it's also very important for us from just a human resource point of view to have these initiatives. So to summarize, yes, I mean, it makes sense in terms of business, it makes sense in terms of human beings, and it makes sense also just because if we don't do it, there will be no business in the future because there will be nothing left.
Thank you. So we heard from extractives, we heard from logistics. I am really tempted to hear from the digital industry in Africa, and Safaricom obviously is leading the way on so many fronts.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question, Your Excellency. The reality is that as we go ahead, generations are going to be evolving, and we are preparing for the future generations. That's the reality. So what's in it for us very directly, at the risk of repeating what has already been said, we are working with communities. So when you look at the 5G technologies, or as the technologies evolve, there's always been a risk of what does that mean for the communities where we are going into. So that partnership, that engagement, awareness of what does it exactly mean for the communities that we are going into is extremely critical, and informing them and working with them to say, this is what the opportunities come with the technologies in terms of digital awareness, in terms of business opportunities across the continent. So like yesterday, for your information, we did launch the M-Pesa platform here in Ethiopia. We are doing a soft launch. So the opportunities that come with that. So M-Pesa is a mobile financial services that has already been very successful in Kenya. We have now officially launched it here in Ethiopia through the Safaricom Telecommunications Network. So these kind of opportunities, in as much as they are purely business-oriented, they do open up opportunities into the rural area. So even from a business perspective, it's not only makes sense for the bigger telecoms industry, but then you also see opportunities for people to do business deep in the rural area. So yes, it does make business sense from a corporate perspective, but then also the single human being right down in the village, these opportunities do exist for them in a big way. And we are seeing that opportunity opening up. And then being a HR leader, I must say this, opportunities from a skill set perspective, I think you've already mentioned it. When we are hiring people, some of the young graduates, they do want to be associated with opportunities where organizations are taking care of current generations and future generations. So we are in it together in a big way.
Thank you very much. Now, we will go to the African Development Bank with the second part of the question, which applies to so many situations in this room, I think, in many countries.
Yeah, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Good to see you again. I'm sure you're asking about doing things differently with the private sector. 2018, we asked ourselves that same question. How do we bring the private sector fully into climate change? So we established what we call the Africa Financial Alliance on Climate Change that brings together key players all over the world. Let's sit together, let's understand what is in it for you and how this can affect you. As at that time, many people were still seeing climate change as something that will have environmental consequences and so on. I remember speaking with one reinsurance boss. He said, Tony, I'm convinced I should join this group. Why? Because there was an El Nino in South Africa 2015, then there was a drought 2016, then there was a fire 2018. And that fire burnt an entire posh estate that he had reinsured, and he sank the company. So that if he had known this, he probably would have done things differently. And so that became the model. How do we work together? How do we create these enabling environments for the private sector. So for the financial segment now, we are having central bank governors, supervisors coming, joining that group to say we need to do things differently. Let me give you a simple example. My country, interest rate is 28%. Whether you're taking the money to buy luxury cars or you're taking the money to import solar pumps or what, it doesn't matter. Why would an impact investor, why would anybody want to go there to take a loan at 28% for a green project that will take him a while to recover when he can take it and go buy luxurious cars and come in? So those are the conversations that we're having. How do we let the private sector see what is in it for them? And one of the things we've done is to change the narrative. Everywhere you hear climate change in Africa is about the doom, the gloom, the vulnerability, the risk, and everything. This drives away private sector. No private sector person wants to come in. And if they do come in, the premium we pay on insurance to the risk, that perceived risk, becomes too high. The cost of capital becomes too much. So we've changed that narrative to say, what are the opportunities? What opportunities do the NDCs bring? NDC, for instance, in a particular country says we're going to do 1.3 gigawatt of solar energy from rooftops. It's not the government that will do it. We present it as an opportunity for the private sector. But when you look at it as a sunk cost, how much is it going to cost us? Nobody comes in there. So we've changed the narrative. We've changed the narrative of the Sahel that sees the Sahel, for instance, as a zone of conflict, criminality, migration, all manner of things. And we've set up the desert to power to say, look, you have a lot of potential energy here. Why don't we tap this energy and reinvigorate your economy and keep people back in the Sahel dancing? And it's working. Countries are signing on like very heavily because they are now seeing the opportunities and not the doom.
Changing the narrative is obviously something that's powerful and important, but is it enough? What kind of policies and what other things that go with that to make it actually happen and happen at speed and scale?
I've always said private capital goes to where social capital exists, and private capital comes out very gently. What are the policies in those countries? So we're working with countries to create enabling policies that would allow private sector to come in.
What are the 3 top enabling policies that you feel can change the trajectory when countries say, okay, I will change my policies or I will direct my policies in this direction? And this is perhaps, maybe it's useful to refer here to local markets, national markets, regionally, pan-African kind of cooperation, but also attracting direct foreign investment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Like the minister mentioned, it's a policy decision that 100% of the country's investments must be green. It's a policy decision. So we help countries see the benefit of it to be able to make such policies, for instance. We've also seen policies that gives you differential loan rates. If you're bringing in money or bringing investments from that will green the economy, you get a lower interest rate than if you brought in exotic cars and so on. Those are direct policy instruments that need to be done. So I think we'll leave it there, but it's important to state that the government, through the leadership, has a way of driving. This morning we heard Rwanda was the first country in the world to ban plastics, as it were. It was a policy from the government because they looked at it and saw the benefit of what it would bring. So we work with governments to let them understand what are the benefits of getting things done and attracting foreign direct investments. Then once they can see that, we then proceed to work with them. Finally, the African Development Bank has an establishment called the Africa Legal Support Facility. We see a lot of poorly negotiated contracts between African countries and foreign companies over minerals and so on. It's typical that the foreign companies come with very solid lawyers and will just get their way through. So we have set up that facility that says, if you want to negotiate a mineral contract, infrastructure contract, we make that service available to you, give you crack lawyers, the best you can do in the field. And many countries are taking advantage of that to enable them to negotiate with the counterparts. And this is a direct policy that they will not go into negotiations without the support of the African Legal Support Facility.
Anthony, thank you so much. I mean, we realize that each of these topics and each of these interventions require, and it will be fascinating if we have a deep dive, but it will not happen during this lunch. But it will happen, some of it, during our collaboration during COP28, but definitely at the UN Environment Assembly early next year. Now, I need to move the discussion in another direction. I'm so pleased we have here Sheila Han. And Sheila Agawai-Han is the director of UNEP's Industry and Economy Division. And I have a question for you, Sheila, please. Would love to get your perspective. And then would like to hear from you, your thoughts on that. And please, our distinguished guests, your interventions and your feedback is very much appreciated. Sheila, what strategies need to be adopted across government, but also industry, to empower a just and meaningful green structural transformation in Africa?
Okay, thank you, Shireen. I want to maybe come back to Egypt's comment, because I think it's a very interesting one about how do you shift behavior of different actors. And I thought what's very interesting is governments have very powerful tools at their disposal. One is the policy incentives that can be created to shift the behavior of industry. Two, the government's own public spending, which can leverage other private sector spending. And then, of course, what governments themselves purchase through procurement. And maybe I could give an example of plastics. So we have the Global Plastics Agreement under negotiation now, and by end of next year, we will have a Global Plastics Treaty being adopted by governments. Let's just take the plastic space, where member states have decided to look at the full life cycle of plastics to prevent pollution right from upstream down to, when plastic could become waste. So it means reducing the scale of the problem and, having more alternatives for single-use, short-lived, problematic plastics, plastics with harmful additives. It means incentivizing those alternatives where governments already have lots of youth, lots of other investors looking at alternative materials to plastic, especially packaging. What are the policy incentives they're putting in place there? There are also policy incentives needed to have reuse systems so that you're not disposing things straight away, but keeping them circulating in the economy. And then lastly, where you have waste, that actually you have recycling at the end of the day, but it's not it's not the silver bullet. And that means that any plastic produced has to have recycling facilities available. And it means holding industry accountable for being able to produce polymers that are recyclable and that the recycling really can happen. Because it's one thing to say it's recyclable and then there's no facilities to be able to recycle it. And that requires the incentives, the standards in place that shift the behavior of companies, that creates new jobs, new investment opportunities. In this next month, we're going to have a global meeting on mining. We're going to have the global chemicals framework being adopted. So again, there are going to be important spaces for governments to create those policy incentives, to be able to look at their own spending, to see where they can leverage investment from the private sector by using their own spending to be able to influence that, and to create the necessary tax incentives and all. I found it interesting to hear about the Africa Financial Alliance, and at UNEP we have a partnership with commercial banks and insurance players who are all moving towards what it means to have sustainability, not as a separate corporate sustainability on the side, but their whole core system. And there are national banks in the region, there are insurance companies in the region looking to see how do they shift their entire portfolios towards sustainability. And of course, governments incentivizing that behavior is going to be key to getting more players in that space.
How would they incentivize that behavior? If we can give me an example or two, just to be more specific.
So for example, if, let's just say a commercial bank is going to set it in place, better loan rates, better investment vehicles for others to come in. Why would it do that? out of its own good nature, yes, some will go that extra mile. But actually, if governments set the policy to saying, actually, you have less of a tax burden, you have more incentives, so that eventually you have tax breaks or other kinds of breaks that allow you to be able to incentivize and give better loan rates to more greener investment, then you can shift the behavior of the private sector, banks, insurance companies, industry actors, etc.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And yes, please. Oh, yes, please. Ambassador, you have the microphone.
I'm requesting kindly that the one who asks questions must ask his question and let the panelists talk to us. If the one who asks questions is going to answer himself and talk at length, then these people are not going to have the chance to speak.
You are absolutely
Thank you.
right. Ambassador, would you have another commentary or a question to the panel at
That
this
is
time?
my comment. We pose questions and let them answer.
Well taken.
Thank you.
Well taken. Thank you very much. Before I put my question to the panel, maybe I should ask, do we have any comments or questions from the floor at this point? Okay, so I'll proceed with my question, but the floor is open, please. Yes? Fantastic. Please introduce yourself. Yes, we have translation, but I'll request here, please, to have the headphones for the panel. Yeah? I do not speak French. Okay. And we do have the translators right there, so they are ready.
Yeah, I would like to speak in French so that my fellow minister from French-speaking countries can also understand. Tout d'abord,
Well, I'd like to start by conveying my gratitude to Ethiopia for having invited all of us here to this beautiful country for the 19th session of AMCEN. I'd also, of course, like to convey my gratitude to all of my colleagues and the organizations present here in this room. My question/comment will be to know, in the private sector, might it not be useful for them to also play a role in the restructuring of projects to ensure that they can be profitable, that they're bankable? In most countries, we have CDNs with sectoral projects which are nicely set up, but I believe that it is also very important that bankers, financiers, consultants should all have a role to play in terms of assistance, in terms of advice, just to ensure that these projects are more financeable by the private sector as well as other organizations. Now, the African Bank for Development referred to an alliance for climate. I think we look at this as well. Alliances amongst bankers and financiers, consultants, advisors, to ensure that these projects are taken up as well as is possible by the private sector.
Anyone would like to comment on that? Do you have a specific question that you would like to put to the panel?
yes, my question is I heard that ADB has this alliance, so I think that we should, if they can develop more alliance around how to structure our projects to make them more financeable, I will say. They have this facility to help countries to negotiate legally in the mineral sector, but if they have also all the facilities to enable countries to structure better their projects, so we can have a better a better welcoming on the financial market.
I think it's well taken. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, like you've said, it's our passion to help through the Africa Financial Alliance on Climate Change. We actually work with the financial institutions because that's where most of the private sector guys go to. And so we want to keep them ready, prepare them, give them the enabling facilities that they need, the enabling environment. Then we also have project preparation facilities that we have that can help you structure, okay, help you develop projects that we know are bankable and contribute to low carbon and climate resilient development. We've identified that finance may not necessarily be the main obstacle to project development. It would be just the ability to develop that project itself. And that's why sometimes you hear people say, we have projects, we don't have money. Others say, we have money, we don't have projects, because of the inability to develop these bankable projects, which we need to have. So we have those facilities that help in preparing projects. Then the third thing is the quality of finance. You know, you can look at finance in absolute terms. How much? What is available is not much, is not enough, definitely. Then you also have the quality of that finance. Most people are unable to access climate finance for development projects. And when they attempt or to get those finance, the premium becomes very high. So the cost of capital for most of us from Africa or developing countries is actually higher than you have that elsewhere. So how do we deal with that to enable people realize that sometimes the risk is just perceived risk? So we have a lot of risk guarantee instruments also that say, look, everyone thinks it's very risky. We put this guarantee there. We have 2 billion in room to run. It's a risk facility. You borrow the money. We guarantee you to the bank. If you default, let the bank take it from us. And we realize that most times the default rate is minimum, in fact, doesn't exist. But it's just that perceived risk that we have about Africa. So we're working to address those perceived risks through our risk guarantee instruments.
Thank you very much. I want to take the discussion for a second towards innovation and towards infrastructure. And I know that the panel here is very well versed in that, but perhaps I would also like to call upon Her Excellency, Minister of Environment in Botswana, to share with us some of the innovative work, especially in policy. We heard from His Excellency, the President of Botswana in COP27, a very clear path towards innovation and investment in innovation and in infrastructure. So I would like to give the floor to Minister of Environment Botswana, please. Your Excellency, perhaps to the panel, it will be good to understand from your perspective, how are we taking the discussion surrounding investment in infrastructure forward in Africa, maybe giving Botswana with its innovation hub as an example, and what would you be looking at from the private sector point of view in terms of supporting this effort and bringing their investments and their expertise to that part of the world, please.
Thank you very much. Caught by surprise. The first thing that I want to share is the importance of, making sure that governments provide a fully enabling environment for a thriving private sector. That should be at the apex of a national state vision. So if we make sure that policies, laws, programs, control mechanisms, the structures within government actually facilitate an easy entry into the space by private sector, then we can be able to leverage private sector and balance it out. So when we begin to negotiate with private sector, we are able to actually be enabled by the environment of good policies, intentional programs and laws. Now, in terms of our national development plan in progress, banking or hinging on the SDGs and stuff, we have a national vision. It has pillars. Sustainable environment is one of the pillars. And the ministry that I lead coordinates intergovernmental approach to planning and budgeting for a sustainable environment. About 7 ministries, including public works, that takes care of in infrastructure. So we are able to direct plans and budgets as a consolidated government for concerned ministries working together. We call them thematic working groups, and then the ministry that I lead coordinates that. Now within that, we determine the sort of infrastructure that is needed, also for tourism, because, it has to be touristic, with aesthetics and stuff like that. But, being able to endure harsh conditions that could be provided or, we face with climate change. Now, we have to make sure that we can integrate. So if we integrate like that, we can agree as 7 ministries, or my ministry and Ministry of Public Works, that this is how we will engage the private sector. Now, government also, we start off with infrastructure, building, dams, roads, and reorganizing, the fiscal spaces and settlements and stuff like that. Then we engage in private sector to continue running with this. In terms of innovation, we made sure that we talk about how best we can transform our planning and drive the plans. It's one thing to have good plans, but implementation. So the president set a research agenda in which one of the key themes is innovation. So the Botswana Digital Innovation Hub, it also capacitates young innovators. They develop apps, they develop, tablets, and we are able to distribute tablets in the schools, and also we have the smart boards that make sure that every village in the country is connected, and we are able to deliver the M-Pesa, the Orange Money, and all that, providing basic infrastructure. But I want to say to the private sector that while government invests in basic, budgeting, we have special funds as well, National Environmental Fund, Conservation Trust Fund. We also have funding that, advances, business for young people, women, and so forth. When a country does that, building from within, I want to pose to the private sector, how do you value countries or states that are able to mobilize from within? Secondly, and then be able to support them from that. Do we have a special consideration because we are actually providing that? Secondly, natural resources in Africa, the continent is rich. How do we transform the mindset of seeing natural resources at the value that it should be and beginning to facilitate trading within those resources before we even go out for external loans?
Thank you so much. I would like to ask Clément and Emily and KPMG to provide us with their perspective.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to mention something about the policy. The policy is extremely important, but the long-term commitment and the stability of the policy is also extremely important. I have to tell you that every year, we have to make our budget for the following year. In countries where there are elections, we will budget lower than the previous year because we know there will be business disruptions and most of the investments will be on hold waiting for the results of the elections. And this is actually a big impact to the business and a big impact to our business, but to the economies in general. So the sustainable and the long-term commitment of this policy is equally important because when we invest in a country, we don't invest for the next 2-3 years. We want to be there for a very, very long time, and we need to have the visibility. If the laws or policies are changing, that's a big concern to us. So we will take that into consideration, obviously. In terms of the trade, of course, working for DHL, for us, it's all about international trade. It's extremely important. The trade facilitation, we really look at countries who reduce the trade barriers and who also promote, for example, online customs tool and reduce all the paperwork. It makes things faster and more efficient and obviously more transparent. So that's extremely important to us. Also the countries where digitalization also very important in terms of facilitating exchanges of finance between countries. So that's also critical to us. And obviously the infrastructure, the road infrastructure, for example, I'll give you an example. Johannesburg to Addis by road takes 3 weeks. By sea takes 2 weeks. It doesn't really make sense. It's actually faster and cheaper to go by boat all the way to Djibouti and then truck from Djibouti or rail from Djibouti to here, while we could go straight by road. Actually, the best would be rail. This is the cleanest mode of transport. But the rail infrastructure in Africa is still lacking, at least for intra-Africa trade. The infrastructure is still very much from places to the port for export to other continents. But what we need especially is governments to look at how to promote the infrastructure building for intra-Africa trade. Of course, the African continental free trade area is extremely important, and its implementation, smooth and fast implementation, will have a key role in developing the intra-Africa trade And we really hope that this is going to happen fast, because that's exactly what's needed. The other thing, and this is more from the private sectors, most of our customers do not know the markets of their neighbor countries. They might know better the market in the US or France or China than actually here maybe Kenya. Why? Is because they have no interest, or they have not been taught, or they have not really got the education that there is business to be made in Africa. They always think that the money is overseas. And that's extremely important also, that we change that mentality, that they understand that the future of Africa is in Africa and is trading within African countries. That will be a massive game changer too.
Emily, I'm asking you this not as Coca-Cola, but as a key partner, as the Kenya Private Sector Association, in the preparation of the Africa Climate Summit. So perhaps you can respond to this from this point of view, in terms of the importance of building the foundations and the policies that are required for the kind of infrastructure required to move forward.
Thank you for that, because it's the first time I'm speaking. Let me first take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this meeting and your excellencies. This is really a distinguished platform and a rare one as such. It's really, really impressive to see that we are beginning to have conversations at this high level, private sector, business, across the continent. This is truly the beginning of the future of Africa. And this is something that really touches ourselves at the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. I feel like the panelists here have touched on quite a few areas around policy, and also Her Excellency from Botswana articulated a lot of the policy issues very well. So I'll try and avoid repeating what has already been said. I think we're preaching to the converted. But I want to share a perspective of, I like bouncing off thoughts with some of my mentors, and one of them is in the climate space. And he captures this so well. For Africa, we narrowly missed the digital, revolution. Although now we are catching up with it. We missed out, and we're catching up on the agrarian, revolution, as well as the industrialization piece. Today, we've had so many times that Africa has all the resources it needs, whether natural, whether in terms of the youngest population on the continent. And we have the opportunity to literally shift the direction of this continent because of what we are now calling the green industrial age, which means we must change our mindsets completely, and we must have a very clear way of making very bold and decisive decisions around the policies that will make us future fit. We've talked about the policies that exist that may need some correction. We've talked about great policies that are already working in our markets, but I also want to plug in that we need to keep our eyes open because of how quickly the world is changing in this space. So, for example, when you look at the EU Green Deal, where in just a few years, Europe will be exclusively using electric vehicles, we will still be with our fossil fuel powered vehicles here in Africa. Where will we be getting spare parts from? We don't have enough here. It's the same thing with equipment that we use in our factories. We really need to start having future-fit policies to enable this kind of thinking. The other area I can think about is how are we using artificial intelligence to make our work easier? The cost of doing business, the cost of running our countries is very expensive. If for example, we used artificial intelligence in giving us data around how our power grids are efficient or not, we will know how best to manage our energy. And I think that's a perspective I would add to what has already been well articulated by my co-panelists.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'd like to hear from KPMG, given that you can speak across different sectors, actually.
Thank you very much, and I'm really humbled to be here, as said by Emily, the excellencies, to speak my own personal views and also what we do. So what the question that has been asked is very interesting, and I was tempted to just ask the excellencies and the team in the room whether they know who KPMG is. Perhaps Safaricom is everywhere. Any minister who knows KPMG? Wow, okay, good. So I represent the professional services team, and we work, as mentioned, we work very closely with companies, we work closely in sectors, and we see quite a number of things. So going to your question, what has been said, I can just add two things. One is the integration that you've just talked about. The integration will not be achieved if we don't use technology. In the corporate world, you'll find, like the same way you mentioned ministry, you have different ministries. We do appreciate, we see a lot of activity between ministries, but you don't see that interconnection. And that interconnection cannot come with just by human interface alone. You need technology to connect people, to improve on communication, and most importantly, to drive efficiency. One of the things that you will find you're grappling with is on the driving efficient delivery of services, whether it's to the citizens or even to the private sector. I see another opportunity in terms of when you look at what the private sectors are doing. I think time may not be enough to drive this home, but you will see each and every company now across East Africa, for example, they have done what we call material assessment of the climate change issues that you see across. And then they work very consistently to address those particular material issues and looking at climate change from a risk management perspective. So when you look at what companies now do to appreciate what the Excellency from Botswana has mentioned, is to now come up with a robust stakeholder management. And when you see the various reports, government is one key stakeholder that the private sector is managing. That, to me, means reception of the key initiatives that the government is putting in place. If you look at the way the initiatives that government are putting in place, there's also the aspect of where now private sector takes that opportunity to drive now green solutions. Green, like if you see in the banking sector, green bonds that now drive provision of financing that now comes into dealing with the real climate issues. Now, what you may know is now the shareholder action in the private sector where now there's demand for reporting and disclosing. We don't see this much in the government sector, particularly on transparency reporting. How transparently, like today, I've been checking very closely because we are in that field to see which government produces a robust sustainability report. And then in that particular sustainability report, it will enable governments to look at the issues that they are addressing from policy and those incentives that now the private sector takes in. Right now, the regulation, as Emily has talked about, the EU one, is pushing every company to report on their climate-related risks. And they have a whole robust of around 70 taxonomies where you have to report climate-related matters. For those ministers who are monitoring and working with the Ministry of Finances, you will see now private companies are already pushed into internationally disclosing how they are dealing with climate-related matters. And that has been defined by International Sustainability Standards Board. So really, I will be coming back later maybe on the partnership, but I think what the government is doing is really appreciated by the government, the private sector, but that interconnectedness between the private sector and the professional, I wouldn't even say the professional services firms, but the connectivity between governments and private sector is a miss. And if we can get that alignment across the continent, then that would be great. I want to finish by saying KPMG globally has put 1.5 billion US dollars to address matters that relate to climate change and has transformed the way people, ESG, and technology going to work to impact. Because we believe if we have over 260,000 across the continent joining governments through what we call our infrastructure government and healthcare, teams of about 2,500 across Africa, then we will win the war. I think that's what I would.
That's brilliant, Bernard. Thank you so much. And I'm personally very pleased that you mentioned disclosure. Next month, we will be holding a deep dive into disclosure the ESG new regulations and what are their implications for governments and for business, taking Europe obviously as an example, but also being aware that there are implications in terms of the accuracy of how companies are rated, especially when it comes to climate ratings and emissions rating. So it's a big issue, and data is a big issue in UNEP. We are about to put out, hopefully soon, a big data strategy, a global environmental big data strategy draft, and we hope that some of these issues would make their way, because data is about lots of things. Part of it is accountability and disclosure. Now, we have some interventions from the floor, and thank you, Ambassador, for alerting us to that. We appreciate it. So I'll start right there. Please introduce yourself, and then I'll go to the back. Can we have a microphone?
Moi ou un peu plus? J'ai un micro ici.
I have a microphone here, says the speaker.
Okay, go ahead, please. Yes, please.
Merci, je suis...
Thank you. I'm Arlette Soudan-Nounou, Minister of the Environment of the Republic of Congo, Sustainable Development, and the Congo Basin in Congo. I think everything was said, but I would like to highlight something which is positive. Africa, and I will insist on that, has all the resources and all the solutions in order to auto-finance its actions. What we lack as regards human resources is a lot of capacity building efforts, because we have all the policies, all the strategies necessary for our states. We even have a continental instrument which is good, which is SLECAF, AFC, FTA, which will allow us to have the same means of communication in order to put up a circular economy which will be sustainable. But then again, as it was said, Africa is lagging behind as regards digitalization, new technologies, and so on. However, Africans are having difficulty in exchanges. We do have solutions on the continent, but we cannot at the same time come back to equity questions, equity in trade between the North and the South. I am a Minister of the Environment for 7 years now. I have enough experience through the different conferences of parties, climate, biodiversity, and so on. I also have the advantage of having managed for 6 years now the coordination of 16 countries plus one, which are the countries of the Congo Basin, which is well structured today with an investment plan, a pipeline of projects, which was set up by some of the best firms in the world, KPMG, among others, which just took the floor. This is World Finance. They won the bid. In order to be transparent, we had a call for bids, and then we had international organizations who helped us to develop terms of reference. There was an African Development Bank, those of the Central Africa to welcome the funds. We have a trust fund for the Congo Basin, like is the case for the Amazon area. We have a multilateral development bank, which allows us not only to have this trust fund, but also to mobilize and to make bankable and eligible to financing to other projects which are very innovative, more than 300 projects coming from the 17 countries part of the Congo Basin, which are the national contributions. So we have moved forward. Where I don't understand, though, that's where there's a weakness, is that we are going round in circles. There's a number of instruments, and I'm happy to see that island states during the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh have moved forward with the setup of this fund for loss and damages. And then there are other issues, desertifications, droughts. There are arid zones, island states are disappearing, but since the Paris COP, we have still not been able to set up a mechanism, Article 6, 2, 3, and 4, the Paris Agreement on carbon market, a sovereign carbon market. This is what I don't understand. From one COP to another, we go in circles. Every specialist will tell you that there is something that can be done. But we decided to create a voluntary market, which is totally deregulated. It's the Far West kind of situation. So we continue for people who are not well prepared, who are vulnerable to climate change. Many African countries, they are not ready for the effects of climate change. If you take the Congo Basin, for instance, represent 1.5 billion tons, and the peatlands as well, it's 31 billion tons of gas emissions. So we are providing an ecosystemic service. So we need in this energy transition to find the resources necessary for that. But why doesn't the Paris Agreement, and many have mentioned it during the opening, that since Copenhagen in 2009, we're talking about $100 billion and so on, and it's only been promises for now. However, we are moving forward, and I think that if we want to be realistic, even if they have access already to a ton of carbon for $70, for $50, I just don't understand why we specialists of countries in the south and those in the north, we cannot find a solution to this difficulty. We find it difficult to create a mechanism that we have advocated for. We did sign the Paris Agreement. I'm sorry, maybe I'm not a technical person on these issues, but I wonder why are we still going in circles around an instrument that should be set up and that would allow an increase of 30 to 50% of the GDP of our countries. So my country, the Republic of Congo, which is heading the Climate Commission in the Basin, there are two other commissions, that of the island states and those of the Sahel region. My country will welcome in Brazzaville on the 26th, 27th and 28th of October a summit of these three world ecosystems, Amazon, Southwest Asia, as well as the Congo Basin, which represent 80% of the forests and 77% of biodiversity in the world. So we want to find solutions, specific solutions. And I will finish here. The 350,000 hectares that we need to reforest during the decade of restoring the lands. So there are solutions. And when we speak of the private sector, I do appreciate the fact that the support of the private sector, and we mentioned it in Changudu 3 years ago, that we need to de-risk these issues so that the private sector has access to this type of financing. Otherwise, we will continue forever to mention maybe progress, but not really mobilize the resources. We will move forward very slowly, whereas we can leap forward immediately. This is what I wanted to share with all of you. I think that we need to look at things as they are, because we, countries of the South, we are suffering from climate injustice, and this has becoming unbearable now. We are saying things which are obvious in different meetings. We come and we repeat the same things, our national policies, our sectorial policies. I'm not going to come back to the one of my country because it is in line with most of the documents, especially the national contributions, which is part of the discussion on the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, we hear you loud and clear. And if I may, perhaps just take some of the elements that you've mentioned, very relevant and important contributions in terms of what the countries of the South, like Congo, Brazzaville, and others, are really doing in order to be able to meet their targets, in order to be able to move matters forward, yet the promises of the Paris Agreement are not met in any way. And maybe you mentioned here, and if you allow me, perhaps I can focus on that and you can tell me if that's all right. One of them is carbon credits and investments in carbon credits. And I don't know if someone from our panel would be comfortable talking about that. And it seems to me also investment in terms of partnerships in order to be able to at least cover part of the financing gap. So I think that will lead me to the African Development Bank. And Anthony, so we will have to talk about, does the bank have a position or activities in terms of carbon credits? Because I really don't know. And then on the other hand, public-private partnerships and investment, how can that maybe change the trajectory and respond to some of the elements that Her Excellency mentioned?
Thank you very much. This is a very thorny topic over the years. We start from the days of CDM. Everyone loved the whole idea that we could make money out of clean development mechanisms. But by the time it was taking root in Africa and people getting to understand, it collapsed, you know. And I think the carbon price got down to about 50 cents per ton at some point. That's how low it was. It wasn't very lucrative anymore. And the voluntary market, yes, is being reactivated. We're working on a carbon support program at the bank, trying to identify countries, work with them to be able to help them set up their carbon market structures that would take advantage of their forest resources. But these are still at very preliminary stages. We also are trying to see how do we get countries, if we really so much believe that there's money in the carbon market, can countries use their credits to pay for their loans? This is something that we're still discussing. It might come through. That's how we started discussing this facility that allows you that when you are vulnerable, you have a crisis, we suspend your loan payment. You know, it started like that and it's coming through. So I'm believing that we should be able to help countries to benefit from their carbon resources. We as a bank cannot set up a carbon trading scheme. It's not, we can't buy the carbon and so on. So this will continue to be issues between the government and the private sector in that aspect. But as the African Development Bank, we are not set up to trade in carbon credits. So I think I'll just leave it at that point.
Thank you. I think we have a question from Ghana. Your Excellency, I'll take... Okay. And then we will go directly to Ghana after.
I would like to thank you again, and I'm relying on your patience. It's an issue which is extremely important for our governments. When the banks in general do not have a solution here and there, and you have 54 states in Africa, which is the case today, what do we say? What does Africa say on that? What do countries of the South say? We are trying to find financing in order to provide $1 or $2 million to the states so that you respect Article 5 of the Paris Agreement, reduction of emissions, accelerate this process so that we'll have quantification, certification, and eligibility as well, according to the Framework Convention on Climate Change. So we just need $1 or $2 million per state in order to have to meet the criteria. So solutions were proposed. So now there lacks will to establish this partnership between states and multilateral development banks. We are having this conversation with the IMF. We have this discussion with the World Bank. I'm going to go to Marrakesh during the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank, and on the agenda, this issue is going to be discussed. We're going to discuss it also in New York with the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, who offers a number of solutions in order to have a more regulated carbon market. This is my contribution, and perhaps that the ADB will be with us like all other multilateral development banks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for your contribution. I'm going to go to Ghana, please.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My question is very simple. There's this observation that there's paucity of application of market mechanisms, especially in the energy sector, particularly with regard to electricity generation. As it is, Africa is in a very, very inferior position. And if you take Ghana, for example, where we even have electricity penetration of 90%, still the whole environment is festooned with monopolies, independent power producers who dictate to our governments. So, in fact, some of us ministers will be having conversation. We are very much afraid. When you throw in the element of these green minerals too, where its supply is also limited, and then private capital is coming in, and there's this asymmetric distribution of knowledge, how can we get good value for Africa going forward? That's my question.
Thank you very much. And I think this is a question that applies both to electricity but to any other kind of area of technology advancement and even digital. So perhaps I'll seek some inputs from my panel. Steve, do you want to have a take on energy, maybe not electricity specifically, but the energy perspective?
I'm not sure that I got the question fully. Can you repeat it?
Maybe I would ask you to just make it a bit shorter and more focused.
Okay, I will try. I'm saying that in the energy sector, when we are dealing with private sector, you want to go near to market mechanisms as far as possible. That's supply and demand. But in the energy sector, those things break down. They don't apply. And in the Ghanaian situation, the whole environment festooned with pseudo-monopolies. They call themselves independent power producers. And more or less, they dictate to us what price we have to pay and so on and so forth. Now we are transiting into a new uncharted territory. That is this, what we call renewables. And there to find elements there about, private sector. Actually, even the players in there are from the global north. Minimum participation for us. My question is that, how do we ensure that we get equity via market mechanisms that you are bringing in? That is all.
I can't speak to the market mechanisms part of it. I'm sorry. I know this isn't going to answer your question fully, or maybe if at all, but we'll see. Look, the power situation in Africa, I would say is dire compared to most other parts of the world. If you just talk about the grid system here in Africa, every country, every electrical grid has losses. Power is generated, and there are losses along the line before it gets to a consumer, a business, or a family. In Africa, those losses are unusually high. In the DRC, for example, for every 100 kilowatt hours of electricity that are generated, only about 50 make it to an outlet. I was having a conversation with a minister from Namibia. Namibia is about 40, right? So, there are decisions that can be made to focus on the power system, and there are partnerships that exist that are there to support Africa as it tries to modernize its power grid system, and also in terms of the transition to renewable energy. I know that's not answering the question. He's asking about market mechanisms, but I think the problem is just fundamental here on the continent, and that focus needs to shift away from, you know, traditional methods. The minister from Egypt talked about business as usual. Business as usual isn't working here anymore, right? Don't generate more power. Focus on the system that you have and make it more efficient and resilient, and you'll already see some improvements in sustainable development and socioeconomic benefits on the continent.
Sorry, very quickly. We always talk about appropriate pricing of energy. Most African countries over-subsidize energy, and it's a political decision. A study we did not too long ago showed that most African countries subsidize energy 22 times more than they actually put in other forms of energy. The fossil fuel, 22 times, that's where money goes to. And so when investors come in, basically these are not philanthropies. They want to be able to recover their monies. And so when they come in, and we realize that what we had before was heavily subsidized, so when they put the appropriate pricing, it makes it look extremely very large, as if but that's just exactly what it is. And so for countries like mine, Nigeria, access to energy is very low because we cannot agree on this appropriate pricing issue. You remove subsidy, the country burns, goes aflame, you know, and all that. So it's quite a difficult issue. But we need to get to the point that we can actually have tariffs that are cost reflective. And I think that's where we can make it. Secondly, most of those energy contracts were not properly negotiated. That's the truth. And that's why we've set up the Africa Legal Support Facility I mentioned. Let's use these facilities. You'll be amazed at how much better a contract the African countries will have. Thank you.
Just would like to add one thing. You can also, especially I would like to speak about South Africa. We also have, there is also an energy issue there. The private sector, for example, for us, all our facilities are off the grid, are self-generating our own electricity, mainly with solar panels. And we have, in many municipalities, we have entered agreement with the municipalities to actually sell our excess capacity back to the grid. And this is, in fact, generating energy available for, of course, other companies or for the market. And if every company does the same, then it's actually also another way to generate capacity for the countries.
Thank you very much. I want to see if there are any other interventions from the floor at this time. I would like to welcome President of AMCEN and our host, Minister Fitsum Asifa Adela, Minister of Planning and Development of Ethiopia. And Minister, may I put you on the spot and may I ask you a question, please? Thank you so much. We will bring a microphone, please, right here. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. So, Minister, I would like you to share your vision on how to empower a new brand of partnership with industry in order to be able to deliver Africa's vision and Africa's efforts for a green transformation. And you mentioned during your opening remarks the Green Legacy Initiative that Ethiopia is leading. But Ethiopia now is also the president of the AMCEN, and we are very keen to hear your views, especially that we have such a distinguished panel from diverse industries operating globally, but operating also in Africa.
I think, this vision that you asked me about really is empowered by the fact that climate change and building green economy and, working for green future is not just a fancy word for Africa. a word that we, hold conferences here and there. Of course, the conferences are important, but it's really a threat. It's an issue of life and death, because we have witnessed with our own eyes that, lives and livelihoods perishing because of the impacts of climate change. So the vision for greener future for Africa is not, something that we just talk about or something that we put on papers and then stay on that paper. So for us, it's a matter of survival. So that vision, of course, cannot be realized unless we really work with the private sector, the industry you mentioned. Previously, issue of climate change used to be considered an alien matter, so that should be dealt separately from the development endeavors and, investments, the private sector. But now we have realized that, these two things are not mutually exclusive. So any development, again, cannot happen unless we partner with the private sector. So, addressing development endeavor, you just have to make it more green. You have to mainstream in all the sectors, then it happens. So it's not just separate things that we have to work hard to bring these two things together. It was only in our minds. Naturally, there are lots of gray areas and they blend together. So when you design your development plans, when you design your policies, so you have to make sure that issue of climate change, issue of environment is an issue of development. Then now the private sector goes without saying, right? So the vision would be really bringing on board the private sector through the planning process, having that inclusive, planning process, having everyone to have their say on the strategies, our future, our children's future, our youth future. So I think we'll build that vision together and we'll coin the word, but I think that's how I think about it.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And inspired by these words, this is how we are going to close this segment before we have a very exciting launch that the Regional Office for Africa is championing together with the Science Division. I will ask our panel a compounded question, and I would like each one of you to take a stab at it. The question is, sector-wide transformations, from your point of view, from your experience in your sector, and maybe, Anthony, this is not exactly in your area, but how do we achieve sector-wide transformations from the mining sector to the logistics sector to, with Coca-Cola, I will have to look at plastics, and I will request you to speak about that to the digital sector. How do we achieve sector-wide transformation that would allow us to green our industries, not only in your business, but your entire sector? And what is required to empower that? So this is part one. And part two, what's your vision in terms of doing business with Africa, in ways that would help transform economies in the most sustainable way? So I will start with Steve, and we will work our way this direction, and then I will end with the African development banks with what are the three things, Anthony, that you foresee are required to strengthen a new brand of public-private partnerships for the planet and for Africa. Steve, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll go quickly. I know that we're pressed for time. I would say that, for an industry like mine, it's collective ambition. And then you achieve that by putting aside your competitive nature, because we're an association. Our members are competitive. So what we do is we provide a non-competitive environment for our members to work together and to, for example, to issue an industry-wide decarbonization roadmap that shows how we're going to get to net zero. So I think, collective ambition is important for industries. And I think in Africa, everything that we do is about empowering local communities. You know, there has to, the transition has to be just. You know, we have 3 sustainable energy partnerships here on the continent now. I'll just give you the names, you could look them up. United for Efficiency, Grid Efficiency and Resilience, so making Africa's grids more efficient and resilient. And then CORE, the cornerstone of rural electrification, training people in local communities to install and maintain their own decentralized renewable energy systems. So all of these things are empowering local communities. And then as a blanket statement, I would say, you know, Africa, as I had said earlier, and this came from I think the speaker from Senegal this morning, has 1/3 of the world's reserves for minerals that are driving the clean energy transition, that are driving decarbonization, right? But they're getting extracted and they're being brought to other parts of the world to create the products and the technologies that will enable decarbonization. Can we create a system that allows the minerals, at least in part, to stay in Africa, and then you are building the solar panels, you are building the batteries that are enabling EVs rather than other countries benefiting from that?
Thank you very much, Steve. So I'll move to Emily. And Emily, you will focus on your role in terms of sector-wide transformation with focus on plastics.
Thank you. So I know this is a very interesting topic for very many of you here in the room, but let me first start by saying that as a company, we've been in Africa for more than 90 years. We've been through thick and thin with Africa, and what's even more exciting, we're here to stay. We're very passionate about the continent, and we are betting very big because we believe in this continent. And this is why you'll understand why we are so keen in making sure we do our part in eliminating plastic waste. So let me start by saying that we understand the complexity of managing plastic waste across particularly our region in Africa. And that's why we were one of the first companies in 2018 to, during the World Economic Forum, we made a public commitment that we will collect all our packaging waste equivalent to what we put out in the market. And by the year 2030. This is very, very bold, considering that we operate in 200 countries across the world. And we also have to navigate some very complex structures and policies to ensure that we do that. The second thing we committed to do is ensure that our plastic packaging is 100% recyclable. That was in 2018. Today we are 98% recyclable. The third thing we committed to doing is also focusing on eliminating problematic plastics and also working through partnerships, because the complexity of managing plastic waste needs everyone. We need the scientific community, we need education, research, we need obviously private sector and its value, the plastic value chain, we need government. And this is why we then we became part of the business coalition for the Global Plastics Treaty, which has been the singular voice that we've been driving. And we have more than 150 companies. We've mobilized more than 150 companies across the world to join this initiative. And for those who've been part of the International Negotiation Committee discussions for the Plastics Treaty, you've seen that private sector has been very vocal on that. I'd also like to recognize the Africa Group and the submissions it has made through these negotiations, because these are really going to transform circularity on our continent. By driving policies such as extended producer responsibility, as well as introduction of recycled content in our packaging, will greatly reduce the plastic that is in the environment. And we are really looking forward to seeing the treaty come to life. We are fully in support of it and are working locally with most of you to already, where there are no regulations yet, we are already driving voluntary extended producer responsibility initiatives. Where there are regulations that are coming through, we are working with you, and not just as Coca-Cola, but as the business coalition on the Global Plastics Treaty, to ensure that these regulations actually work and drive a circular economy. And I really do believe that Africa could be that poster child for eliminating this menace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We go now to Clément and DHL, the logistics sector.
Yes, so our engagement in a few different folds. The first one is about reducing waste. In logistics, you have huge amount of waste. A lot of the trucks you see on the roads are empty or half empty, and they pollute the same as a full truck. So how can we optimize the supply chain in order to reduce this waste? It's not even about yet changing the type of fuel, for example, but really reducing the number of kilometers driven on the road. And for that, we have developed tools that we introduce to our customers in order to look at the whole supply chain and see how we can make it more efficient and reduce the number of the distance traveled on the road, because that's clearly carbon emission. The number two is about the emissions themselves, the equipment we use. So all our facilities are being converted, have been or are being converted into carbon neutral facilities. And the vehicles, we are also actively working on electrifying the fleet, as well as the airplanes and the shipping lines, changing from the normal fuel to biofuels, because that's today the best solution that we have. And so we have a lot of partnerships with biofuel producers in order to reduce our carbon emission. Then it's all about reporting. We spoke about it earlier. We are offering free carbon reporting to all our customers, and we are promoting it to them to make sure that they themselves start to really look at their own carbon emission and try to reduce it and set targets to themselves. We have very strict targets to ourselves, but we want our customers to start to do that for themselves too. And the fact that we have targets for ourselves, we also look at our subcontractors, because a lot of our business is also outsourced. So we give clear guideline, and actually when we engage in a business relationship with our partners, we give them targets of carbon emissions for themselves, so they start also to embrace that topic and take active role in reducing the carbon emission. And at the end, that's also very important, is training our own people. We have developed internal trainings about what we call Go Green. It's our internal program to train our own employees in terms of how can they change their own way of living, not just the business, but their own way of living, so they can go home and tell their families also how to adapt the use of plastics and so on. So the word is being spread out, and this is having more impact than just as a company, that we impact the society.
Thank you very much indeed. If it's okay with you, Bernard, I'll go first to the digital sector, because you'll speak like in a more holistic way.
So I'll focus on two quick areas very quickly. The telecommunication sector has got a fund called the Universal Service, a fund that focuses to bring opportunities to the more rural areas. So one of the most significant ways in which you can then partner is to partner, and when you're doing the technologies, the technologies to the rural regions are more focused on the green technology. And then we also focus on bringing more learning hubs, digital hubs through the green technology to the communities there, because that way the communities have got a double benefit, that it is both green technology, then at the same time we are opening up opportunities for the rural community. The second area that we are partnering very closely and opening it up is on the carbon value exchange trading platform. So there's lots of conversion that right now, M-Pesa, which I said earlier on, is a financial services platform that we are partnering with other organizations like Microsoft to be able to accelerate the digital carbon financing across Africa. So we see this as real opportunity for us to be able to open up and make the cost of doing business much lower and bring this awareness across the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My apologies, we'll have to make this really, really short, because actually we are holding a session and we have a very important launch. So Bernard, 3 points that you would like to make at the end.
Thank you. I believe the private sector can contribute immensely to financing, to providing finance for climate change management. We have worked and we do a lot of research around this area, and to His Excellencies, you will note, in the private sector, what every CEO says, and this is globally, they put about 6% of their total top line revenue to manage climate change matters because it is very important for them in terms of sustainability. Number two, if you check the 94 trillion globally that is required to address the infrastructure requirement for managing all these issues we are talking about, 60% of that is coming from private sector. And then in that amount, you'll find from the emerging markets, which I think is the LDCs and what we're talking about here, 2.3 trillion, 2 to 3 trillion is the budget gap. Now, I see what KPMG is doing across the continent in terms of working with development partners, some of them seated with me here, and we appreciate. And we work very closely. So for me, just to keep it short, even as we do reports, I like what the High Excellency said, that why are we going in cycles? It seems like the finance is the issue. And what you need to know, even in private sector, that was the issue before. It started with communications department are the ones talking about corporate social responsibility. And the investors want to see where is the finance for it. So generally key messages, private sector, partnership with the government will create more results. And then the incentives and the policies that we've talked about will really bring it to full realization. Allow me to leave it there.
This is brilliant. 3 points, Anthony, on PPPs, taking away from KPMG.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'll just touch 3 things which we've discussed before. The first is policy, quality of the policy, and policy stability. Most African countries have 4-year policy cycles depending on the election, because when the next president comes in, he's going to change the policies. That will not attract private sector. The second is, how do we enforce mutually benefiting contracts, not the exploitative contracts? Why should Africa continue to be the source of raw material? Why can't we add value? Why can't we beneficiate the minerals? Why can't we polish them here? It's cheaper, and it's lower on emissions if we did that here. Then the third thing I would want seeing across all this is capacity. We take it for granted. Most of the private sector players on the continent are not very conversant with PPPs for green infrastructure. And the government side, they are also not very familiar with it. So what happens? We slam a very high risk value with high premiums on it because we don't know where we may find. And then let me just add one more, enhanced access to finance. When somebody comes as a private or as an investor with all the finance, the 100% finance, he's going to dictate the tune and exactly what you get. So I think the government should be able to have access to their own finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our panel. I want to thank your excellencies for bringing your vision and your expertise to this panel today. Spearheading Africa's green technology and investment revolution is a conversation that we started here with the launch of the Science Policy Business Forum Africa. And now to conclude this conversation, it is my pleasure to invite the director of the Africa Regional Office for UNEP, Ms. Rose Mwembeza, who is going to launch a very important report for UNEP, the Africa Environment Outlook for Business. Rose, you will take it away from here, please.
Thank you very much. I think I will just hand over to the Deputy Executive Director of UNEP to launch this important Africa Environment Outlook for Business report, together with the AMCEN President. Elizabeth, please.
Good afternoon. Because of the constraints of time, we will avoid any further delay. But this is the product of the contents of which is exactly all the discussions we've had this afternoon with our panelists, with yourselves, and many of the questions, I'm sure, which have been raised. Hopefully some of the answers will be in this publication, which is the Africa Environment Outlook for Business. The organization will normally have Africa Outlook for Environment, but this now is targeting specifically the business. And when we say business, it doesn't mean it's only the private sector to look at it, but as they have reminded us, private sector need enabling environment for them to operate. So the government and government delegates hopefully also will take interest in looking at this publication, see how we can create that public-private partnership moving forward. Thank you very much. And allow me to hand the first copy to the Minister.
Close up. Let me just say 2 words to really express my gratitude to the UNEP and of course the European Union for financing this because it's really, really important that we have such publications and creating such knowledge. It's really important that we are, guided by such knowledge and information and evidences while, putting our policy intentions as governments. Of course, my brother said there, the predictability of policies are really, really important for investment in the private sector. And, attaching policies to a government in office has been a challenge for Africa, but such evidence and such knowledge is really, really important for us in Africa so that we have a comprehensive, coherent, and consistent policies that would create enabling environment for the private sector. Thank you so much one more time for supporting this important flagship project. Thank you so much.
We thank you all for this excellent event, and we wish you success in your deliberations. And thanks to our panel.